Members, take your seats.
She is here. Yeah.
Members, take your seats. Members, take your seats. The House will come to order. The chair recognizes the member from Auburn, Representative Osgood, who moves the House adjourned from the session of April 26, 2023. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The House is adjourned. The House will attend to a prayer by House Chaplain Reverend Bob Smith, pastor of St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Manchester.
Thank you. Before I begin, when I was here in March and I began a prayer in a certain way, one of the representatives stopped me to tell me a heartwarming story about their granddaughter, Antonia. If you are here today, I have the card that I had said that I would write to your granddaughter. And I'm going to begin the prayer this morning in the same way that I began in March. Good morning, God. Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, New Hampshire House of Representatives. Let us be in an attitude of prayer. O loving God, when you spoke to Moses through the burning bush to lead your children out of slavery to their new promised land, Moses asked, "Who am I to lead the people? If they ask me your name, what should I tell them?" In Exodus 3, verse 14, God replies, "I am the one who always is. Just tell them, I am has sent me to you." Just like Moses, we are sent to lead and represent the people of this great state of New Hampshire. Help us to remember, O God, that you are the one who always is. You are the great I am, that walks with us each and every day. Be with us as we conduct the business of the day and help us to understand the way in which we are to go, the way that will be in the best interest of the people we represent. It is with gratitude that we serve the people of New Hampshire, and it is in gratitude that we also serve you, O God. Be with all the leaders of this house as they, like Moses, lead the way with the business that will be placed before us today. Give each representative the wisdom to understand and to reason the legislation presented so they can make the best decisions possible. O God, the one who always is, please guide and direct us this day. Amen.
The chair recognizes a member from Newport, Representative Skip Rawlins, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The chair now recognizes Isabella Osgood, a student at Newport High School, in our page for the day, who will now sing our national anthem.
I can't hear. So sorry, guys. That's embarrassing. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night of the flag was still there. Oh, say does the star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
The House will attend to requests for leaves of absence.
Mr. Speaker, the day, illness, Representatives Grossman, Hatch, and Vincent. The day, important business, Representatives Bay, Buros, Linda Gold, Hacken Phillips, Dennis Mannion, O'Hara, Sellers. The day, illness in the family, Representatives DiLorenzo, Nordgren,
The House will be in
Petternell.
order.
The day, death in the family, Representative Panic.
These leaves of absence shall be granted unless otherwise ordered by the House. House will attend to the introduction of guests.
Mr. Speaker, please welcome John Sheehan, son of Representative Sheehan, Melanie and Christopher Osgood, parents of the singer, guests of Representative Rollins. They are with us in the gallery today.
Welcome to the New Hampshire House. The House will attend to a communication.
Mr. Speaker, in an email communication on Wednesday, April 26, 23, Speaker Packard, I have given this a tremendous amount of thought, and with the recent events regarding my health and ongoing appointments and treatments, I feel as though the doctor's office has become my second home. I understand you would rather see me on medical leave, but as I mentioned to you before, when I first attempted to resign was that I feel as though I cannot represent Rockingham 1 effectively if I am on medical leave. This is something that I have struggled with since our conversation. I am not one to take a position and not fulfill the obligation that comes with it. That's not fair to my constituents, the House, or you or me. Whatever energy I have left, I must use it to focus taking care of my health. I've always, throughout my life, have put others before me, whether that is the military, my days as an EMT, law enforcement career, the countless hours of volunteering to help communities, to helping veterans. I've always been that person people can look up to count on, and know that I will take care of things and get things done. I need to take a step back today. I need to put my health first, and above everything else, I cannot continue to be there for everyone if I am not here on earth. My health has to come first. When and not if, I always try to remain optimistic. My health makes a full recovery. I hope to one day return to the New Hampshire House and continue serving my constituents in Rockingham District 1 if they'll have me again. Mr. Speaker, I hope you'll understand, even though it's only been a short time, it's been an honor to serve this great state in this great nation. Please accept my resignation. Thank you, Benjamin T. Bartlett, Rockingham District 1.
The resignation is accepted with regret. The House will attend to an amendment to House rules as proposed by the Rules Committee in your seat pockets. Representative Osborne and Wilhelm move the adoption. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted by the necessary two-thirds vote. The House will attend to Senate messages.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate concurs with the House in the passage of the following entitled Bill with Amendment, in the passage of which amendment the Senate asks the concurrence of the House. House Bill 407, relative to regulations on alcohol.
Representative Hunt moves we concur and is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment that was added on is the bill itself was a couple of different liquor issues, but more importantly, some of you might have heard about Amtrak having a little problem selling liquor on their trains, and this amendment will address that problem, and that yes, they can sell liquor on the trains while they drive through New Hampshire.
The motion before us is to concur on House Bill 407. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Chair recognizes the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate concurs with the House in the passage of the following entitled Bill with Amendment, in the passage of which amendment the Senate asks the concurrence of the House. House Bill 520, relative to escrow accounts maintained by licensed non-depository mortgage bankers, brokers, and servicers.
Representative Hunt moves we concur and is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate just moved the effective date to make it upon passage.
The motion before us is to concur on House Bill 520. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Chair recognizes the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate concurs with the House in the passage of the following entitled Bill with Amendment, in the passage of which amendment the Senate asks the concurrence of the House. House Bill 613, relative to regulation of the individual health insurance market under RSA 404-G.
Representative Hunt moves that we concur and is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this bill is revising the statute related for the Insurance Department's regulation of the Medicaid expansion. Since we did change it in House Bill 2, the paragraph that was added to is making sure it harmonizes with what we passed with the budget.
The motion before us is to concur on House Bill 613 FN. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Chair recognizes the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate concurs with the House in the passage of the following entitled bill with amendment, and the passage of which amendment the Senate asks the concurrence of the House. House Bill 550, relative to charter public school dissolution.
Representative Ladd moves we concur and is recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What the Senate did to this bill is what they usually do to our bills where we set up a committee. They've eliminated one of the senators that is participating on the committee, so it's from 2 to 1. Other than that, we support the bill. It's exactly the same as we sent to them. Thank you.
The motion before us is to concur on House Bill 550 FN. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Chair recognizes the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate concurs with the House in the passage of the following entitled bill with amendment. The Senate asks the concurrence of the House. House Bill 152, relative to soil and plant additives.
Representative Aaron moves that we concur and is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our committee recommends concurrence on this bill. This bill has to do with soil amendments and fertilizers, and there was a change to when a fertilizer is deficient, the rebates that can be collected on it goes, instead of for a ton of fertilizer, half ton. So we recommend concurrence on this bill.
The motion before us is a concurrence on House Bill 152. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The House will now attend to the consent calendar.
Mr. Speaker, from the Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, Senate Bill 195, removed by Representatives Grota, Fred Davis, Grassi, Marjorie Smith, Stewart, Talerski, Tony Lekis, Alicia Lekis, Corman, and O'Brien. From the Committee on Fish and Game and Marine Resources, Senate Bill 15, removed by Representatives Spillane, Hill, Tom Mannion, Nodder, Hole, Santanastaso, Sheehan, Yokella, Harrington, and Tony Lekis.
Are there any other bills to be removed from the consent calendar? Senator Wadworth moves the consent calendar with the relevant amendments as printed in today's House record be adopted. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent calendar is adopted. Under Rules of the House, from the Committee on Children and Family Law, Senate Bill 172 FN is referred Committee on Finance. From the Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, Senate Bill 49 FN is referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and Senate Bill 40204 FN is referred to the Committee on Finance. The House will attend to the regular calendar. Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety, to which was referred Senate Bill 209, relative to providing menstrual hygiene products at no cost to individuals who biologically menstruate in the state and county correctional facilities. This is without recommendation. Senator Harriet Gothright is recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to table SB 209, and I ask for a division vote.
The motion before us is to table Senate Bill 209. Are you ready? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that. This is a division vote. Members will take their seats. House will come to order. The motion before us is to table Senate Bill 209. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open. Chair, my mistake. Chair recognizes Representative Rhodes for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that this body already passed legislation and sent it to that body that was written so well that the legislation in front of you was sent to us with the expectation that we would rewrite it to make it match the verbiage that we already sent. And Mr. Speaker, if I know that by tabling this bill, in the event that they screw up the bill that they have, they can write the amendment and bring it back to us for us to try to pass again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion before us is to table Senate Bill 209. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds.
Representative Davis and Maggiore. I need thumbs. Thank you. Representative Brown. Thank you.
All members present had an opportunity to vote. House will attend the state of the vote. (357) voting yea, 9 voting nay. Motion is adopted. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 77, relative to changes in school placement for students, has come to us without recommendation. Representative Ladd moves on to pass. Chair recognizes Representative Luno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 77 mandates all school boards approve taxpayer-funded tuition agreements with private schools. Under current law, this is an option school boards have now, especially if the school district does not operate its own schools for a specific grade level, for example, an elementary, middle, or high school. But this bill is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Proponents of Senate Bill 77 describe it as housekeeping. We've all heard that before. Just tidying up some loose ends that must have accidentally been omitted back when the Manifest Education Hardship Law was changed 4 years ago following a strong bipartisan effort. That law allows a parent or guardian to request a change of school assignment when a student is experiencing an education hardship at school. And by law, change of school assignments can be made to another public school or to an approved private school. It's rare, it's done administratively, and it's done with little or no additional cost to the school district. So at a minimum, Senate Bill 77 is totally unnecessary, since assignments are already being made to another public school, or, particularly when a district does not operate its own public schools, to another approved private school. But Senate Bill 77 abuses the intent of the law and mandates all school boards approve taxpayer-funded tuition agreements with private schools, even when the district has their own schools. It's sneaky, it's deceptive, and it abuses an important provision in education law meant to help kids. Bring it into a directive to approve private schools' tuition programs at taxpayer expense. It even goes so far as to require schools approve private schools approved by other school boards in other school districts. And I bet your constituents are going to love that. So some people don't care about the destruction of our high-performance public schools and the opportunities and strong outcomes these schools provide the children of New Hampshire. About 165,000 kids and their families across the state do. And so do property taxpayers who approve local school budgets and reach deep into their pockets to make up for the lack of state funding, a responsibility the legislature has shirked for too long. So think hard about this vote. Think hard about asking your constituents, especially those retired, living on fixed incomes, to dig deeper and use their property taxes to pay for private school tuition bills when they're already paying for public schools. You're going to have to explain this one. So for kids, families, and taxpayers, please vote no on the ought to pass motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do request a division vote.
Chair recognizes Representative Ladd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, we've heard words like adjectives like sneaky, deceptive, destruction of public schools. That's not what this bill is all about. When we talk about manifest education hardship, and some of you may not be familiar with that terminology we have in education law, it's been around for years. Within the minority report, it says it's a relatively new concept, a new education leadership program, hardship program. It's not. Back in 2013, I can recall modifying the manifest education hardship statutes based upon what was being done in Cambridge, Massachusetts at that time. It was also part of No Child Left Behind. The purpose of manifest education hardship is not to provide another choice for everybody to go, well, I don't like this school, I'm going to go to another one. That is not what it was designed for. In fact, in working cooperatively with the New Hampshire School Boards Association and other groups, we came forward with legislation that's now statutory law that says this is what a manifest education hardship is for. Such hardship must be so severe, pervasive, or persistent that it interferes with or limits the ability of a student to receive an education. It's not where a parent can walk in the door and say, I want my student going to school A over there because they have a better algebra program there than they have in school B. That's not a rationale for the hardship. The hardship is for those situations, those rare situations in which a child is being bullied to the point where they can't make it in the present school. I experienced that in my own family. I had a youngster in the middle school who was an outstanding athlete, but was being bullied over and over. We talked with the counselor, we talked with the principal. They understood it, but it didn't stop. It went on because the kids were bullying that youngster. So we looked at, what are we going to do? Back in those days, I did not have the option of manifest education hardship. I had to take and pay for that youngster to go to another school where she thrived, has now been on the dean's list at the University of Maine for 4 consecutive years, captain of the indoor and outdoor track team, set all kinds of records here in New England in the pentathlon. So these options have to be available. They are available now. And if this occurs within a school district, that school district, through the school board, has the option of sending a student to another public school, private school, or non-public school in their district, or a school outside their district. And the schools that they're sending to, they don't have to go out and say, well, I'm going to approve this private school so we can go there. We have the Department of Education right now that's already approved, how many here? 98 schools for attendance. They've approved 98 schools for attendance, which are non-public schools. They've also approved another 40 schools which have shown that they've gone through the accreditation process, New England Association of Schools and Colleges, the New England Association of Independent Schools, and 3 others. That is a real trip to get that type of accreditation. In fact, it's in our statutes as one of the methodologies for accountability for providing the adequate education we are supposed to be providing to all kids. In conclusion, this bill is a result of an oversight in legislation which was put forth several years ago. There are 6 sections of law which speak to this area where you can send students to as if there's a manifest education hardship found. This simply corrects an error in statute. In the 5 of 6 paragraphs, the private school alternative is mentioned along with public schools, a public academy, etc. But, however, in the 6th paragraph, where that was supposed to be changed, there was oversight and drafting that was not made. So what we're trying to do is have all 6 sections in this chapter agree and parallel each other. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Senator Natasha. Does a member yield to questions? Member does not yield. Representative Senator Natasha has requested a roll call. It is sufficiently seconded. Members, take your seats. Motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 77. This is a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Tanner for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that this is not a simple change in wording or an oversight to a long-standing collaborative process that has happened between public schools to place students who are experiencing extreme manifest hardship to another public school. If I know this change has the consequence that will force local school districts to pay full tuition rates at many schools now, non-public, private, even out-of-state schools. If I know as a result of this change that there will be a substantial increase in the financial burden on local schools, resulting in a raise of local property taxes. And if I know I don't want to explain to my constituents why I raised their property taxes, then would I press the red button to vote no so that another more responsible motion can be made? Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Ladd for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know this bill simply corrects a technical omission made during the last update to the Manifest Education Hardship Statute, and if I know this does not raise your property taxes, if I know Manifest Education Hardship is rightfully available as an alternative education placement granted only in such hardship cases where it's severe, pervasive, or persistent, would I then support this proven program that's in the best interest of students by pressing the green button? Thank you.
Motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 77. It's a roll call vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. All members present had an opportunity to vote. Also attend the state of the vote. 187 voting yea, 183 voting nay. Committee report is adopted. Majority of the Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 152 FN, Act relative to New Hampshire workforce training programs. Having considered the same, report the same with the recommendation the bill ought to pass. Senator Valerie McDonald from the majority of the committee. Minority of the committee, having considered the same, being unable to agree with the majority, report with the following resolution. Resolved that it's inexpedient to legislate. We have floor amendment 1642H. It's in your seat pockets. Are you ready for the question? Chair recognizes Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. I'd like to talk to you for a moment about our amendment to SB 152. What this bill does is it creates two new pathways within the career technical education departments in schools and high schools. It creates a marine trades pathway and it creates an offshore wind energy pathway. Now, if we're going to be using taxpayer money to train students for specific type jobs, this should be an investment that comes out good for both the student and the taxpayer. The marine trades portion of this bill appears to be a good fit. However, the offshore wind energy does not. First of all, these offshore wind jobs do not yet exist here. They are prospective jobs, and we should not be training students for something that we don't know is even going to exist. And if we do, we can expect that in coming years there will be further lobbying of this body to further subsidize this industry to create the jobs that we have trained these students for. Offshore wind is one of the most expensive and already most subsidized forms of energy available, and that would appear to make this primarily a special interest bill with this provision in it. This is not green energy we're talking about here. We cherish our coastline in New Hampshire. We cherish our biodiversity, and we depend on it economically. There has been a long documented history of offshore wind resulting in marine mammal die-offs and damage to biodiversity. Turbines do experience failures, and when they do, they often dump copious amounts of oil. Further, the carbon break-even point for turbines often exceeds their useful life. Finally, this program has inadequate oversight. It creates a commission with the ability to spend money, yet it does not appoint a single person from this body to that commission. Lastly, for those against the bill who are inclined against the entire thing, please know it is likely this bill will pass today. This amendment makes this bill better. So I would ask you to please vote yes to remove the wind energy pathway and keep the marine trades pathway in this bill. And I would ask for a division.
Does the member yield to questions?
Yes, sure.
Member yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. It's my understanding that these windmills cannot operate with a wind speed beyond 35 miles an hour. Is that correct?
I can't speak to the specific specifications of the windmills in question, but I do know they are in fact limited in their capacity to a certain minimum and maximum wind speed.
Chair recognizes Representative Ladd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This floor amendment strips sections 2, 3, and 4 from the bill. There are 5 sections. By doing so, the amendment eliminates the non-lapsing fund in the Department of Education that is identified as the Career and Technical Education Workforce Development and Innovation Fund, a program fully supported by our career and technical education centers. The fund shall include federal and other grants, proceeds designated for workforce development by the federal government from the Gulf of Maine offshore wind lease auctions, and contributions from businesses and industries. Within a section of the amendment, it eliminates the commissioner is authorized to establish procedures for the use of said funds. That's eliminated in this section, and to disperse funds in accordance with the committee identified in Section 3. This is done in consultation with the Business and Industry Association, the New Hampshire Labor Department, CTE directors, and technical education centers, and through partnerships with business and industry collaborating with the community college system of New Hampshire. The amendment further eliminates the Offshore Wind and Industry Training Center Committee that involves the Commissioner of the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, the Commissioner of the Department of Education, the Commissioner of the Labor Department, the Executive Director of Fish and Game, and post-secondary education. This committee shall develop a plan for students training in skills and knowledge at the Seacoast Regional Career and Technical Education Centers and Great Bay Community College. The floor amendment further eliminates committee responsibility for the development of essential components necessary for the building partnerships and agreements between education, business, and industry. This floor amendment will negatively impact New Hampshire's workforce training that is a key component of overall economic development and job creation strategy where state agencies collaborate with private industry to provide opportunities for our citizens. The future demand for skilled labor in the marine and energy industries will be significant and involve many positions that will require technical skills, including traditional trades such as electricians and welders. Please support this opportunity to better prepare our workforce for the challenges of today and tomorrow by voting down this anti-business floor amendment that is designed to cut the guts right out of SB 152 and that has no public hearing. It's not been heard by the public. SB 152 has bipartisan sponsorship in the House and Senate, and it passed the Education Committee with a 15-5 OTP vote. Thank you.
I heard a request for a roll call. Who made that request? Is that Representative Phillips? Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote on the amendment. Members, take your seats. The motion before us is floor amendment 1642H. This is a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Ladd for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know this bill will provide New Hampshire students the skills and knowledge necessary for success in emerging marine and energy careers through locally developed career technical education programming, and if I know this amendment will totally strip out sections 2, 3, and 4 in the bill, and if I believe by including marine and energy career opportunities in our CTE programs, New Hampshire students will no longer have to go elsewhere for training to attain these well-paying jobs. And if I also know that there are these tall windmills in areas such as Plymouth right now, further north, along the seacoast, Maine, etc., we do need to have this training in our own state. Would I then support this New Hampshire Workforce Training Program by pressing the red button?
The motion before us is ought to pass on the floor amendment to Senate Bill 152. This is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds.
Representative Bouchard. Representative Juliette Smith. Thank you.
All members present had an opportunity to vote. I think you can see the results. 122 voting nay, 251 voting nay. The amendment fails. The motion before us now is ought to pass. For what reason does the member rise?
Mr. Speaker, a question of the chair.
State your question.
In light of RSA 1449 describing commissions, describing the legislative role in commissions, and I can read that if necessary, is Senate Bill 152 divisible?
Two, 3, and 4 are divisible from 1.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move to divide the question.
So, all right, House will be in order. The first motion before us will be whether we authorize dividing the question. If that be the case, then we'll take up each individual one separately from 2, 3, and 4. Representative Poole has requested a roll call. Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote on the question of dividing the question. The motion before us is the question on dividing the question. To be clear, if this motion passes, 1, 5, and 6 will be voted on, and 2, 3, and 4 will be voted on separately. So the motion is on dividing the question. This is going to be a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Houle for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that our statutes require that any committee established by the General Court have a particular makeup, if I know that that makeup needs to be less than 15 members, and more importantly, if I know the majority of that committee shall be members of the General Court, would I now vote to divide the question and press the green button?
Chair recognizes Representative Ladd for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know RSA 1449 deals with legislative study committees and commissions, and if I know this is not a legislative committee, this is a committee similar to what we have with the Higher Education Commission, which has no elected officials on it to approve post-secondary education. If I know that this statute is not relevant to what we're discussing today, as determined by attorney, would I then press the red button? Thank you.
The motion before us is dividing the question on Senate Bill 152. This is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. All members present had an opportunity to vote. House will attend the state of the vote. 118 voting yea, 255 voting nay. The motion fails. Now we're back to the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 152. Representative Sana Tasto has requested a roll call vote. Is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members, take your seats. The motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 152. This is a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Ladd for a parliamentary inquiry. Representative Ladd waves off. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds.
Representative Murner.
All members present had an opportunity to vote. House will attend the state of the vote. 250 voting yea, 123 voting nay. Committee report is adopted. What reason did the member rise?
To make a motion, Mr. Speaker.
State your motion.
I'd like to table Senate Bill 155. Table.
Majority of the Committee on Education, to which we refer it, Senate Bill 155, FN Local, an act relative to the adoption of school administrative unit budgets. Having considered the same, report the same with the following resolution. Resolved that it is inexpedient to legislate. Senator Glenn Cordelli from the majority of the committee. Minority of the committee, having considered the same, being unable to agree with the majority, report the recommendation that the bill ought to pass. Senator Alicia Leakes from the minority of the committee. Now, Representative.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table Senate Bill 155.
Motion is correct. Representative Leakes says requested a division vote. Members will take their seats. The motion before us is to table Senate Bill 155. Motion before us is to table Senate Bill 155. This is a division vote. Chair recognizes Representative Ladd for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If I know the budget approval process in this legislation may not be appropriate for an entirely different SAU structure in another part of the state from where you may be in an SAU, and if I further know there are approximately 165 unique school districts in New Hampshire, and if I heard during the hearing process that this bill contains many unanswered, unresolved consequences, would I then pause, recognizing this legislation is not ready to move forward by pressing the green button? Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Leakes for parliamentary inquiry.
If I know that this is an important issue brought up by many of our constituents.
This is a parliamentary inquiry.
Yes. And if I know that it therefore deserves a chance for public debate, would I then vote against the tabling motion? Thank you.
The motion before us is the tabling motion on Senate Bill 155. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. I know it. If all members present had an opportunity to vote, House will attend the state of the vote. Hundred 252 voting yea, 120 voting nay. The motion passes. Committee on Election Law, to which was referred SCR 1. House will be in order. An act affirming the General Court's support for New Hampshire First in the Nation primary. Consider the same, report the same with a recommendation that the bill ought to pass. Senator Clayton Wood for the committee. Chair recognizes Representative Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a concurrent resolution with the Senate reaffirming our support for First in the Nation primary status. It's too important to put this on consent and not talk about it. We have a century-old tradition in New Hampshire hosting the First in the Nation primary, and it's now under siege. The First in the Nation primary has been an integral part of our political fabric, providing numerous benefits to presidential candidates, our citizens, and our state. It has given voice to the underdogs. It's fostered an engaged citizenry, and it's brought national attention and resources to our state. However, recent political events have placed this tradition in jeopardy. While the Republican Party has reaffirmed its continued support for New Hampshire's First in the Nation primary, the Democratic National Committee has launched a full frontal attack on our First in the Nation privilege. They have reorganized their primary calendar, attempting to demote our state to a shared second place with the state of Nevada and giving the coveted first place to the state of South Carolina. But this was a false offer. This demotion to a second place would only be granted, and this hasn't gotten enough attention. This demotion to a second place would only be granted if our state met two ultimatums issued by the DNC. And the DNC is a private organization, a private corporation. These two ultimatums are designed to undermine our state's autonomy and pose a threat to our voting system. The first ultimatum demands that we repeal our state law requiring our primary to be at least 7 days before any similar contest. The second ultimatum demands that we pass legislation making absentee balloting permissible, potentially opening up our voting system to election fraud. These ultimatums pose a grave challenge to our state's long-standing traditions and democratic principles. Our state government was given an impossible deadline to meet these ultimatums. The deadline, which is now passed, was February 1st, 2023. So now, since we couldn't meet the ultimatums, our state is relegated further down the DNC's calendar to not being able to hold our primary with the blessing of the DNC until after March 5th, 2024. This would lump us in with many other states who hold their contests during something called Super Tuesday. So what happens if we faithfully follow our state law and hold our primary before any other primary state? Well, the DNC has voted to impose strict sanctions on us if we do not defy their imposed calendar, and sanctions on any Democratic candidates who might violate their edicts, candidates who would face loss of delegates, exclusion from debates, and ostracism by the national party. The motivations behind the DNC's actions are troubling, to say the least. Political retribution has been suggested as a driving force. Given that then candidate Joseph Biden finished 5th in our 2020 primary.
The member will suspend. Invoking names is not permitted. That is correct, or nor attributing motive.
The motives are attributed in the press, so you can find press articles backing up what I'm saying. More concerning is the superficial obsession with identity politics and what they say is a lack of diversity in our state. Some members of the DNC have cited as rationale for why our state shouldn't have first in the nation primary. This is an insult to our voters. And it sends the message that somehow we're defective because of attributes with which we were born. We in New Hampshire disagree with that assessment. We believe in individualism, the importance of judging individuals by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Opinions are not discounted because of superficial physical attributes. These actions by the DNC not only threaten our state's cherished tradition, but also undermine the democratic principles upon which our country was founded. So now, while the Republican Party enjoys a dynamic primary with many candidates visiting and engaging with our voters, the Democratic Party is sadly left stagnant, unable to engage with challengers to the president, such as Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and maybe others. This is robbing many New Hampshire Democratic voters of the opportunity to have their voices heard. Think of it. Democratic candidates will be sanctioned if they campaign in our state, if they spend money on advertising, if they put their name on the ballot. Our sitting president will not have his name on the Democratic primary ballot in our state, an ultimate snub to our voters. Democratic voters will need to conduct a write-in campaign if they even choose to support him. So let's send a message today that we stand united in our resolve to preserve first in the nation primary. We are voting on a joint resolution that does two things. It affirms the general court's support for the first in the nation presidential primary and demands that all political parties respect the results of New Hampshire's primary by seating the delegates of the candidates selected by our voters at their national nominating conferences. So let's stand together, united, in defense of New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary and against these unjust ultimatums and sanctions being threatened by the Democratic National Committee. I implore you, colleagues, and Mr. Speaker, to join me in concurring with the Senate and the Senate's resolution preserving this tradition that has withstood the test of time in New Hampshire. Let us not allow the divisive agendas of others to overshadow the democratic principles that we hold dear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree that we need to provide strong bipartisan support, as does all of my caucus. And they are working hard, as well as our federal delegation and the New Hampshire Democratic Party, in that effort to retain the first in the nation primary. This is one of several bills that have been before the Election Law Committee on this topic, and all of the Democrats have supported them. While the Democratic National Committee can adjust their calendar, our primary date is set in statute, so they cannot change, and we are not changing our statute despite the pressure that was mentioned by this previous speaker. What's helped us keep the first in the nation primary is that Democrats and Republicans work together to protect our primary. New Hampshire worked hard over the 20th century to grow our first in the nation primary. All these other states that have primaries saw the success that we have and have followed our lead. We have worked very hard to build it, and we're working very hard to retain it. In 2008 and 2012, when the Republican presidential primary was being threatened by the Republican National Committee, New Hampshire's Republicans and Democrats worked together to defend it, and we're doing that again this year. In that spirit of bipartisan cooperation, I urge all of my colleagues to pass this resolution and send a message that's loud and clear to everyone. New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary has been first for more than a century and will continue to be first in 2024 and beyond. Thank you.
Sam Sweeney has requested a roll call. Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members, take your seats. Members, take your seats. The motion before us is ought to pass an SCR 1. This is going to be a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Berry for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that this body must stand united and send a message to not only the Democrat National Committee, but any national committee that attempts to assault our First in the Nation primary, would I now vote and press the green button to stand with Granite Staters and uphold this fundamental right of our state?
The motion before us is ought to pass an SCR 1. This is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds.
Representative Rung.
If all members present had an opportunity to vote, House will tend to state the vote. 356 voting yea, 6 voting nay. Committee report is adopted. House will be in order. Majority of the Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred Senate Bill 149 FN, Act relative to nurse agencies, having considered the same, report the same with the following amendment. The recommendation of the bill ought to pass with amendment. Senator J.C. Grotti for the majority of the committee. Minority of the committee, having considered the same, being unable to agree with the majority, report with the following resolution resolved as inexpedient to legislate. Senator Matthew Senator Tasto from the minority of the committee. The amendment is 1463H, printed in House Record 22, pages 33 through 34. Are you ready for the question on the amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The motion before us now is ought to pass as amended. Chair recognizes Representative Senator Tasto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 149 is a reaction to a real problem. However, it will do nothing to solve the problem, but rather exacerbate it. This bill attempts to solve the labor shortage in nursing and lower the cost of nursing labor by making it more difficult for nursing agencies to do business in New Hampshire, write contracts, provide transparent pricing, and hire employees. Mr. Speaker, government does not understand that people respond to incentives. They expect that when incentives are changed, then people will behave exactly as they did before. By adding licensing to nurse agencies, not only do we increase compliance costs, requiring nursing agencies to charge more, but we discourage the allocation of nursing labor into New Hampshire. Compliance costs include people filling out paperwork in the private sector and people filing paperwork in the public sector. These are people that could be doing something useful in reducing the labor shortage this bill is pretending to work on. If we want our healthcare facilities to have more access to labor, then we would open the doors wide open instead of adding compliance rules. Additionally, if a nursing agency is found to be out of compliance, they will lose their license and be forced to do business outside the state and take their traveling nurses with them. Mr. Speaker, this bill stipulates the conditions about how agencies can commit nurses to facilities. This should just be an agreement between the agency and the healthcare facility, making it more difficult for these organizations to contract with each other does not increase the number of nurses in the economy, and it does not decrease the demand for nurses in the economy. It will only make the healthcare facilities more desperate and agree to contracts that are more onerous and expensive. Mr. Speaker, this bill prohibits under which conditions a nursing agency may charge higher prices, like if a healthcare facility has a virus or is in a jurisdiction that is in a public health emergency. If I'm a nurse and I'm offered a bid on 2 jobs, one where there is a deadly virus and another where there is not a virus, and the pay must be the same by law, then I will take the one without the virus. This is precisely why humanity invented prices, so we can appropriately allocate resources. If one healthcare facility has unique dangers, then in order to encourage nurses to work there, they must be paid more. In order for the agencies to get nurses into areas with these conditions, they must pay them more. It will have to be paid for somehow. The agencies will have to increase costs across the board or somehow otherwise obscure pricing from the reality in another way. Mr. Speaker, this bill is against free speech and freedom of association. It states that nurse agencies shall not recruit potential employees on the premises of a healthcare facility. In order to enforce this, totalitarian methods would have to be used to ensure that nurses who are assigned to the facility be put on a gag order as far as the conditions of their employment. Besides the free speech issue, how does increasing advertising costs for the agency reduce overall costs? Mr. Speaker, in reality, labor is a scarce resource. This is why it requires the distribution of paychecks in order to obtain it. Today, many industries are competing for labor. The reason for the high labor costs are varied and complex. It is not as simple as pointing a finger at the nursing agencies and blaming them for everything, and then adding arbitrary rules and hoops for them to jump through. This legislation exists only to make people feel good about themselves pretending to be accomplishing something. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I came here today, I didn't know I was going to be speaking at the well. I am a nurse, and I'm straight out of night shift. I can tell you that this legislation would be very detrimental to my profession. I tried to get a hold of the New Hampshire Nurses Association, but on such a short time, because I didn't know that this bill was on the docket today, I wasn't able to get in touch with them to find out what their position is. But I have worked as a travel nurse before, and many people, many of my coworkers have as well. If New Hampshire can't recruit travel nurses because they're prohibited by the legislation that might pass today, basically the travel nurses are just going to go to Massachusetts. They're going to get higher contracts there, and that's going to put New Hampshire nursing is in a desperate place right now, I can tell you that. And I don't know why a lot of people are talking right now. I'm trying to tell you what I experienced in my profession. We are desperately understaffed, and travel nursing is a Band-Aid to get our patients the nurses that they need on such a short time frame, but it doesn't solve the long-term problem of low staffing. And when we don't have enough staff, it's the patients who suffer. So it's not meant to be like all the time travel nursing, because that is very expensive for the hospital, but it is meant to be a Band-Aid until they can get more staff. And the way to get more staff is to recruit more people into the profession, but we actually have a problem with having enough nursing instructors in the college, and that's where the stopgap is. So that's a separate conversation. But I feel like this legislation is detrimental to my profession, and I can't support it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Brody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me explain to you what SB 149 is. SB 49 addresses issues that arose in Hillsborough County's nursing home, and it was confirmed by other county nursing facilities as well. Due to the shortages of nurses in New Hampshire, nurse agencies' personnel are used to fill shifts at healthcare facilities. It is often the case that at the last minute, a staffing commitment from the nursing agency is pulled from a county home, and the staff is reassigned to a higher paying facility. This has led to an increase of 155% in nursing costs in New Hampshire, per the New Hampshire Hospital Association, who testified in support of this bill, as did county management and nursing home management in New Hampshire. The Office of Professional Licensure and Certification is responsible for the rulemaking pertaining to the requirements of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I encourage you and ask you to pass this bill and vote green. Thank you.
For what reason does a member rise?
For a motion, Mr. Speaker.
State your motion.
I move to place SB 149 on the table.
That is a proper motion. The motion before us is to lay Senate Bill 149 on the table. A division has been requested. Members will take your seats. Members need to be in your seats. The motion before us is to table Senate Bill 149. This is a division vote. Chair recognizes Representative Osborne for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that I just heard a number of concerns from previous speakers regarding this bill, and I know that we still have a couple weeks before the deadline, and that if those concerns were to be addressed in the next 2 weeks, that we could bring this bill back off the table and deal with it at that time, would I now press the green button?
Chair recognizes Representative Grody for a parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, if I know that House Bill 149 addresses a problem that was mentioned by the county nursing homes and other health care facilities in New Hampshire that led to an increase of 155% in costs that are brought down to our property taxes, and if I know that this bill addresses this issue by preventing nursing agencies from switching at the last minute their personnel from one facility to the other, Mr. Speaker, would I please vote against the tabling motion so that we can truly pass this bill, a bill that is needed in New Hampshire by our county governments? Thank you.
Motion before us is to table Senate Bill 149. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. All members present had an opportunity to vote. Also attend the state of the vote. 199 voting yea, 173 voting nay. Senate Bill 149 is placed on the table.
The majority of the Committee on Fish and Game and Marine Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 14FN, an act relative to the use of game cameras. Having considered the same, report the same with the recommendation that the bill ought to pass. Representative Jeffrey Goley for the majority of the committee. The minority of the committee, having considered the same and being unable to agree with the majority, report with the following resolution: resolved that it is inexpedient to legislate. Representative James Spillane for the minority of the committee. The bill is on second reading and open to further amendment. Representative Spillane moves floor amendment 1520 and is recognized to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is a bipartisan amendment that was drafted between myself and my good friend, the member from Manchester, the vice chair. SB 14 came to the committee with some deep concerns for all of us that we could agree on, that no landowner wants surveillance devices placed on their land without being aware of them, that no matter how much land you own, you should have the right to know that somebody's placing surveillance devices. The only place where the committee differed and we couldn't come to terms in the committee was on how extensive to make that change and in what manner. but the vice chair and I got together and crafted an amendment that we are presenting to you now that fixes some problems with it, but still supports the ability for the landowners to have the sovereign right of their land without having somebody unknowingly place game cameras or cameras of any type that can record pictures, video, sound, and etc. I would hope that you can support this amendment and press the green button. Thank you.
Representative Hines is recognized to speak against the amendment.
Thank you. I agree with the premise of the underlying bill, but I think there's drafting issues with the amendment and also some issues with the original bill itself, definition. The definition of game camera, if you take a look at it, is so broad. It includes dash cameras, it includes any surveillance cameras on your house. I think people have a right to have a camera on their house pointed at their own property, and I think the amendment doesn't address that when it speaks of 300 feet of a permanently occupied dwelling. I have neighbors within 300 feet of me. I don't think I should need their permission to have a camera on my property pointed at my property. Further, any cars that have a dash camera or a Sentry version that is in many cars, I cannot even drive on someone's driveway just based on definition. So while I appreciate and I like the premise of the underlying bill, I think it needs work on its language. Thank you.
The question is on Amendment 1520. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. No. The ayes have it, and the amendment's adopted. For what reason does the member rise?
I move to table.
Representative Hines moves to table Senate Bill 14.
I ask for a division vote.
This will be a division vote. Members, please take your seats. The question is whether to lay Senate Bill 14 on the table. Representative Hines is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know the premise of this bill is good, but the language is bad, and I think dash cameras should not be illegal, and I think people deserve to have surveillance cameras on their own property faced at their property, would I then support the table so that this bill can be reworked? Thank you.
Representative Goley is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know this amendment has nothing to do with needing permission to put a camera on your own property, then would I press the red button and not table this?
The question is whether to lay Senate Bill 14 on the table. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 46 in the affirmative, 321 in the negative. The motion fails. The question now is on ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 14. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. No. The ayes have it, and the motion's adopted. And Senate Bill 14 is referred to the Committee on Criminal Justice. Senate Bill 52 comes to us from the Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy without recommendation relative to the regulation and operation of electric vehicle charging stations. Representative Corman moves ought to pass and offers Amendment 1401H. Representative Vos is recognized to speak against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you tell the body where this amendment might be read?
Sure thing. This is printed in House Record 22, pages 27 to 28.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate that. I rise in opposition to this amendment simply because this amendment does not make an unnecessary bill necessary. When this bill was originally introduced, it was substantially different than it is as it arrived here in the House. And the reason for that is because the body that considered it was quite skeptical about the provisions of the bill. So they did what they often do. They turned it into a study committee. This amendment does not address the bill's original intent, but neither will the study committee. Our committee, ST&E, considered the language changes in this amendment and decided that they did not address the major concerns with this bill. Therefore, we can't support this amendment, and we ask you to press the red button. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a division vote.
Representative Corman is recognized to speak in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First thing I would point out is that the ST&E committee actually voted in favor of this amendment 14-6. The amendment is mostly removing a few things, but the main thing it does is it removes the Public Utilities Commission from the bill because it's just premature to have the PUC involved. So therefore, I would ask you to support the amendment and simplify this bill so that it can be what it's really supposed to be about.
Questions on Amendment 1401H, and this is a division vote. Members, please take your seats. The questions on whether to adopt Amendment 1401H. Representative Vos is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll simply reiterate what I said a few moments ago. If I know that this amendment does not make an unnecessary bill necessary, if I also know that this bill was substantially different when introduced, and the study committee that the bill ended up being is not going to address the issues that were brought up by the initial bill, when I now press the red button to defeat this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Corman is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that this bill, this amendment actually passed the committee 14-6, so it had Republican support, and if I know that this amendment actually makes the bill more focused, would I then press the green button and vote for the amendment?
The question is whether to adopt Amendment 1401H, and this is a division vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 183 in the affirmative, 183 in the negative. The motion fails. The amendment fails. Question now is on ought to pass. Representative Bernardi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 52 establishes a committee to study EV charging infrastructure and its funding. I'm sure you all remember when our grandparents in this legislature authorized a committee to study building and funding gas station infrastructure to support John D. Rockefeller. It was necessary so Massachusetts tourists could drive their new horseless carriages to our ski resorts. Otherwise, they were all going to go to Vermont and Maine. No, that didn't happen. But you will be told it's necessary now, and that the committee needs to look at the funding sources beyond that coming from EV users. Room and meals tax, tax credits from business profits, business enterprise and state utility taxes, and enabling local property tax exemptions. Actually, our grandparents let the free market create the needed infrastructure of those times. And it can do so again with no ratepayer and taxpayer activity necessary. Beyond trying to extract money from non-EV users, the committee itself is redundant. In 2018, this legislature passed the New Hampshire Transportation Council. It's embedded in RSA 238A. It has the authority to, quote, study methods of implementing new transportation technologies and modes of transportation and the logistics of such technologies and modes. In 2020, the Council's membership was restructured to include the commissioners from the Department of Energy and the Department of Environmental Services. The council has the power to accept gifts and grants. The Department of Energy and the Department of Environmental Services have over $21 million of non-ratepayer monies that can be used for EV projects. So this bill is both ill-conceived and unnecessary. Push the red button to ITL. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Corman. Long time no see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I haven't met everybody. I am Tom Corman from Ward 3 of the City of Lebanon, and I stand here before you to support SB 52. If we don't build it, they won't come. The "it" is fast charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, EVs, and the "they" are the tourists that much of New Hampshire's economy depends on. Because this bill is really about the future of tourism in New Hampshire. The overwhelming majority of tourists from out of state come from nearby states and provinces, and they arrive by motor vehicle. What kind of motor vehicle will tourists be driving in the not too distant future? We are going to see a lot of EVs. ISO New England, the regional grid operator, forecasts more than a 50-fold increase in EVs by 2031, from 35,000 to 1.9 million. That's just for New England. Add in the other nearby states and provinces, and you get the picture. It doesn't matter how any of us in this chamber feel about EVs. The fact is, they are coming. And we had really better be ready for them, because we sure as heck are not ready now. New Hampshire has only half as many publicly available charging stations as either Maine or Vermont. Our state is a desert for fast EV chargers, especially north of Concord, and that's where people go to ski or hike. Think about a potential visitor with an EV coming from, say, southern New England, New York, New Jersey, Quebec, Ontario, or New Brunswick. They will ask, I can get to New Hampshire, but can I get home? If the answer is no, then they're not coming here. They're going to Vermont or Maine to ski or hike, and our tourism industry suffers. Ski areas and other tourist attractions lose significant sales, as do restaurants and lodging. To give you an idea of the numbers we're talking about, in 2021, New Hampshire welcomed 14.3 million visitors who spent $6.3 billion, that's with a B, which generated $328.3 million in tax revenues. So we had better be ready. This bill, SB 52, establishes a committee to examine how to fund EV charging infrastructure. Not so much about the EV chargers themselves, but about how to get the power to where the chargers are going to be. Fast chargers require a lot of power, and getting that much power to them is often not possible with the existing infrastructure. It is not something that we can rely on the market to provide. The committee will review existing state and federal funding sources along with existing funding by ratepayers, and it will examine additional non-ratepayer funding sources. The bill lays out a menu of possible additional sources. And yes, as my friend from Southampton pointed out, some items on the menu are taxes, but other possible menu items are fees paid only by EV owners and users, and also incentivizing private capital. The bill allows the committee to choose items not even on the menu. It'll look at how other states do it, and the committee will take input from the public and relevant state agencies. There is the New Hampshire Transportation Council, and my friend from Southampton did quote the charter of the council correctly: study methods of implementing new transportation technologies and modes of transportation throughout the state. But they're not looking at the power infrastructure and how to fund it. By contrast, this bill, SB 52, lays out a committee comprising only 4 members, 3 from this chamber and 1 from the other side of the wall, with the focused goal of suggesting how to fund the infrastructure between the grid and the meter serving the EV chargers. How to come up with the funding. Isn't that our responsibility? Returning to what SB 52 is really about, imagine what our tourism industry would be like if we had only a handful of gas stations in New Hampshire, because that's what it will be like in just a few years if we don't get ready to outfit EV chargers. Our tourism industry would collapse, and taxes paid by out-of-staters, hey, our favorite kind of tax, will plummet. And so, if you want to see those sweet out-of-state dollars continue to roll in, then please press the green button and vote for the OTP motion on this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I request a division vote.
For what reason does a member rise?
Mr. Speaker, to make an alternate motion,
Go ahead.
I move to table Senate Bill 52.
Representative Hull moves that Senate Bill 52 be laid on the table.
I would ask for a roll call vote.
And request a roll call vote. Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members, please take your seats. The question is whether to lay Senate Bill 52 on the table. This is a roll call vote. Representative Hull is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the two members that I just heard speak about this committee, about something that is going to potentially increase taxes for the ratepayers, if I further know that electric vehicles currently do not pay the road toll tax, would I now vote yes to table this bill?
Representative Corman is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that this bill just creates a study committee, it doesn't actually raise any rates or any taxes, and that it could be crucial to the future of tourism in New Hampshire, would I then press the red button so that we can vote on the bill itself?
The question is whether to lay Senate Bill 52 on the table, and this is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 183 in the affirmative, 188 in the negative. The motion fails. Might as well stay in your seats because now we're on the main motion of ought to pass. Are you? Oh, look at that. What? Representative Bernardi is recognized to speak against the motion. Never mind. This is a division vote, and we are on ought to pass. Representative Vos is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that studying electric vehicle charging station infrastructure is an ongoing effort at the Department of Environmental Services, the Department of Transportation, and the statutorily authorized New Hampshire Transportation Council, and if I also know that this bill's study committee duplicates much of this effort and exists primarily to study ways to fund such infrastructure by shifting costs to all taxpayers. Finally, if I know that consumer demand will set the pace for the build-out of EV charging stations, would I then press the red button to let EV fueling stations evolve in the same way that gasoline fueling stations did? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Wendy Thomas is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that New Hampshire's economy depends on tourists visiting our state and spending their money on our attractions, restaurants, and hotels, and that the state takes in well over $300 million annually from tourists visiting our fabulous attractions like our mountains, Santa's Village, Storyland, and yes, Whale's Tales. And if I know that ISO New England predicts that there will be more than a 50-fold increase in electric vehicles just in New Hampshire by 2031, on top of all of the electric vehicles from states outside of New England. And finally, if I also know that New Hampshire is considered a charging desert in New England because we lack the infrastructure to provide for those electric vehicles, resulting in those tourists instead visiting other states where they will spend their money, would I now press the green button so that we can prepare New Hampshire for an electrified vehicle future in order to attract and keep tourist money in our own state? Thank you.
The question is on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 52, and this is a division vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 187 in the affirmative, 184 in the negative. The motion's adopted.
Mr. Speaker.
For what reason does the member rise?
Mr. Speaker, having voted on the prevailing side, I would move reconsideration and ask the body to vote no. And I requested...
Representative Weber moves reconsideration on Senate Bill 52.
And I requested division.
Are you ready for the question?
Division.
I'm sorry?
Division.
Division?
Division.
Division?
Division.
All right, division. We'll do division. This will be a division vote. Members, please take your seats if you're not already in them. question is whether to consider the previous vote on Senate Bill 52. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 185 having voted in the affirmative, 187 in the negative, the motion fails. The Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy, to which was referred Senate Bill 69FN, relative to allowing certain nonprofits to participate as a customer generator group hosts under net energy metering, comes to us without recommendation. Representative McWilliams moves ought to pass. Representative Berezny is recognized to speak against the motion.
Mr. Speaker, SB 69 expands net metering by raising the net meter cap from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts for an estimated 6,500 nonprofits in New Hampshire. Let's do a little back of the napkin math. If just 2% of the 6,500 nonprofits take advantage of the new limit, that would be an additional 650 megawatts of intermittent power added to the grid. Currently, New Hampshire has an estimated 400 megawatts of net metered electricity. Therefore, this bill has the potential to more than double the amount of electricity being net metered from unreliable sources. So what is wrong with expanding net metering? A report commissioned by the Public Utilities Commission and published last October found that net metering does cause cost shifting, whereby regular electric customers end up subsidizing the practice of net metering by a small number of other customers. For that reason, this legislature has been very careful and deliberate in expanding net metering over the years. Furthermore, two bills we passed last year, HB 1599 and SB 261, require the Public Utilities Commission to take up the issue of cost shifting, and the PUC has taken up this issue in docket 22-060. The other issue that comes up with net metering expansion is reliability. When the utility buys electricity from the wholesale market, those purchases come with contractual obligation to produce power. This means the utility can be sure that the producer has an incentive to deliver reliable power over the length of the purchase agreement. On the other hand, when utilities purchase net metered electricity, this comes with no contractual obligation. When the power is actually in demand, a net metered customer can choose not to sell into the grid, and conversely, when there's low demand, the customer can force the utility to buy. Utilities cannot depend on net metered electricity to reliably power the grid. To avoid blackouts and interruptions in power, the grid operators have to make sure that there's always a backup of reliable power, ready to kick in to keep things running. For every extra megawatt produced by solar, there has to be an equal capacity produced by other more reliable methods. In conclusion, nothing prevents nonprofits or any other individual or business from producing more than 1 megawatt of electricity for their own consumption. They just can't force the utility to buy access at the premium price. This bill would force utilities to buy more unreliable electricity at the premium price. New Hampshire Department of Energy does not support this bill, and New Hampshire Consumer Advocate also does not support expanding net metering. I urge you to vote red against the OTP motion on SB 69. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Munns is recognized to speak in support of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. I rise today in support of the motion of OTB for SB 69. This bill will enable, not mandate, New Hampshire nonprofits who are able and wish to invest in projects themselves to obtain the full benefits of net metering on projects up to 5 megawatts in size. New Hampshire is currently the one state in our region that arbitrarily limits the size of these projects to 1 megawatt. It will also give smaller nonprofits the opportunity to collaborate and share both the cost of investing in these projects and the returns from them. New Hampshire nonprofits are an important part of our state's economy. In 2019, they employed over 83,000 Granite Staters, which is 15% of our total workforce, and accounted for 13.5% of our state's annual gross domestic product. New Hampshire nonprofits bring people together to shape and improve the quality of lives in our community. In 2019, over 329,000 Granite Staters volunteered at one or more of our nonprofits. They are an important part of the New Hampshire advantage. Every dollar a nonprofit can save makes a difference, whether they can continue to deliver the services to many of our families, friends, and neighbors. Whenever possible, we should do whatever we can to support and assist them. One way nonprofits can save money is to invest in renewable energy, the most popular example being solar panels. Once panels are installed, the cost of every kilowatt hour generated and used is negligible. In addition, as you already heard, under existing law, any individual or organization who chooses to invest in renewable energy projects can also receive a credit for any power they generate but do not use and are able to sell back to the utility. That is what is referred to as net metering. You will hear, as you already have, that because this net metering mechanism already exists, this bill is unnecessary. However, under existing law, nonprofits are only able to reap the full benefits of net metering on projects up to 1 megawatt they invest in themselves. This creates a challenge for most nonprofits because the upfront investment costs of most renewable energy projects are typically too high for most of them to afford on their own. In addition, the optimal size to generate the greatest return on investment for most projects is in the 3+ megawatt range. The additional revenue from net metering this bill will provide to nonprofits will reduce the payback period on these investments, improving the attractiveness of investing in them and providing nonprofits with an important cost-saving opportunity. It will also help to reduce our region's over-reliance on natural gas, which is what drove up electricity prices this past winter and places us at further risk in the future. Now, much has been said about the alleged cost shifting that some suggest occurs from net metering. This is an idea that most of us without solar panels will end up paying more for electricity than those with solar panels. Skeptics of net metering have correctly observed that when our utilities purchase unused power back from their customers, they end up paying more for that energy than if they purchased it from the wholesale market. Exactly how significant a difference that is depends on the vagaries of the energy market. However, many of these skeptics usually admit the fact that net metered projects also result in significant benefits to all ratepayers. From the power grid's perspective, generating your own power and using it locally is exactly the same as reducing demand. It reduces the strain on the regional transmission system and frees up capacity on the grid to move more bulk power to where it's needed most. Utilities see the benefit of this effect in the form of lower regional transmission and capacity payments, and those savings are passed on to all of us. The question, however, has always been, what is the cost-benefit ratio? How much are the costs and how much are the benefits? We finally got an answer to that question this past fall. The New Hampshire Department of Energy hired a team of independent consultants to use the best available data to try to answer the question of whether the cost of net metering outweighed the benefits. The results of that study showed that while at some point in the future we may start to see some sort of cost shift, that day is far off. We can leave our existing net metering rates in place for 10 more years and only then might we see a 1% increase in rates. But that same study also found that while rates may rise, the average electricity bill Granite Staters pay will go down because net metering encourages local people to invest in local generation and receive the benefit of that investment in the form of lower monthly costs on their bill. SB 69 is an important bill not only for the many nonprofits and their employees who do so much good work across our state, but for all Granite Staters. The one thing everyone here can agree on is that we need to address the rising price of electricity that is impacting our constituents. And we all are united, I think, in the notion that we should be energy independent and no longer rely on foreign sources of energy. SB 69 is a very small proposal for how we might start to do that. It will encourage investment in local power generation at a scale that makes sense for our nonprofits, and it will lower operating costs for this important segment of our economy, which will end up benefiting all of us. I urge you all to vote ought to pass on SB 69, and Mr. Speaker, I ask for a division vote. Thank you.
The question is on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 69. Representative Santonastasia has requested a roll call vote. Is that sufficiently seconded? That is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members, please take your seats. The question is on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 69, and this is a roll call vote. Representative Vos is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that New Hampshire's 1 megawatt limit on net metering is not arbitrary, but is in fact a guardrail to protect our state's ratepayers, and if I also know that our state's consumer advocate, who serves to protect the interests of our state ratepayers, opposes an expansion of net metering beyond 1 megawatt, if I also know that expanding net metering to as many as 6,500 nonprofit groups could substantially increase electricity costs because net metered power has a lower value than the reliable power delivered by utilities. And finally, if I know that the Department of Energy advises that policymakers should wait until the conclusion of the Public Utility Commission's current proceeding about net metering before making changes to the law's provisions, would I now press the red button to preserve a guardrail that protects all ratepayers? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Creechman is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that New Hampshire's nonprofits contribute substantially to the well-being of New Hampshire citizens, and if I know that the 1 megawatt limit for net metering was put in place because we heard that we needed to wait to understand its impacts on New Hampshire, and if I know, as my colleague just explained, that those impacts were stated to be very minor or positive, and if I further know that this bill would allow our nonprofits to make the choice to save money without costing anything to other ratepayers or to New Hampshire taxpayers when I now press the green button and support OTP. Thank you.
The question is on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 69, and this is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? The House will attend to the state of the vote. 186 in the affirmative, 186 in the negative. The motion fails. For what reason does a member rise?
For a motion?
State your motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move we lay the bill on the table.
Representative Weber moves that Senate Bill 69 be laid on the table. You ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Okay. All those in favor say nay? Okay. We'll do a division clarifying vote. Nobody in, nobody out. Members remain in your seats. The question is whether to lay Senate Bill 69 on the table. There's a division vote. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds.
Representative Perez. Representative Beerhead and Representative Lane. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Burrows. Aaron. Representative McConkey. Representative Tripp, Representative Harg, and Representative Renzula. I need thumbs, gentlemen. Representative Tripp.
Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? Okay. The House will attend to the state of the vote. 190 in the affirmative, 181 in the negative. Senate Bill 69 is laid on the table.
The House will be in order. Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy, which was referred, Senate Bill 79, relative participation of customer generators, and net energy metering. Comes to us without recommendation. Senator Reynolds moves ought to pass. The chair recognizes Representative Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. Unlike the last bill, there's no limits on who can participate in net metering on this, other than the limits that the market causes because of size and dollars. In other words, any large corporation, no matter how big they are, will be subsidized by the ratepayers to put in net metering if this bill passes. It takes acres and acres to put in a 5 megawatt system, or at least 20 acres, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. The overwhelming majority of businesses in New Hampshire don't have the room and or the money to do this. So we're talking about large corporations like Stonyfield Yogurt, who testified in favor of the bill because they want to see their electric bill go down at the expense of the ratepayers. As it was said in the last bill, the Consumer Advocate of New Hampshire does not endorse any expansion of net metering over 1 megawatt because he realizes it causes a subsidy by the ratepayers, and rates will go up if this bill passes. The previous speaker on the other bill, which applies to this as well, mentioned studies, the DOE study, but that was based on 1 megawatt cap, not a 5 megawatt. There's a huge difference there, and there's a potential for hundreds and hundreds of megawatts to come on the market. And again, just as in the last one, none of these megawatts would have an obligation to provide any electricity at any time. That's the difference. When the utilities sign a contract for default energy service, they go to a supplier, and the obligation is 24/7 for the length of that contract. You will supply all the electricity we need or our customers need, regardless of whether it's hotter than normal, colder than normal, drier than normal, or wetter than normal. Net metering has no provision. They produce electricity when it's convenient for them to do so. If they have a problem with their inverters, let's say, for a few days, they may fix them, they may not. There's no penalty for not providing electricity. But whenever they do provide it, the utility must buy it. So on a Sunday around 11 or 12 o'clock in May, it's 65 degrees, there's no air conditioning load. The company's not using any electricity to speak of because they're shut down, it's a Sunday. And there's surplus electricity, but the utility has to buy it and has to pay them the default service rate. And to put some specifics on this past January, which everyone was panicking about huge high rates and everything, the default service rate was 20 cents about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. The average LMP, or market-based price, for electricity in New England for the month of January was 5 cents. That's the difference. 5 cents selling it into the market, default service rate was 20 cents, because the default service rate comes with that guarantee that I will give you all the electricity you need whenever you need it. The person selling net metering electricity has no obligation to provide anything, anytime. There's also the cost about, people mentioned about how it adds value to the system. But the problem is, without the obligation to provide electricity when it's needed, they provide no reliability basis whatsoever. So in December and January, on cloudy days or on snowy days, these net metering will not only will they not be putting electricity on the grid, they'll be consuming electricity because they won't be producing enough to cover their own load, because solar panels almost go to zero when you're talking about the dark days of December and January, especially if it's snowing out or raining. So those times, though, the grid and the system has to be built to make sure we can supply all the customers all the electricity they need, whether they're producing solar power in net metering or whether they're consuming it. So the reliability value of these projects is almost zero. You can't say, I'll be there in June between the hours of 11 and 4, and maybe you will, it's provided it's not a cloudy day like today and it's raining out, and you want your power whenever you decide you have to have it. That's the problem. There's no obligation to be there. It simply isn't worth the same. I use a simple analogy to hopefully get my point across, and that's with milk. If you have milk coming out of the cow, that has a value. But the milk you buy in the supermarket in a container has a lot more value. It's both milk, it's both the same product, but one's been taken out and nothing's been done to it. The other one's been pasteurized and add vitamin D to it, and it's been put in containers. It's been shipped a couple of times and it shows up at your supermarket. The value of the milk in the gallon container or the half-gallon container you buy in the supermarket is much higher than that same gallon of milk coming out of the cow. The same thing applies here. The value of the electricity coming out of that net metering generator is much, much lower than the value of the default service that comes to your house for your utility. One has an obligation to show up all the time. You want to turn on your TV, turn on more lights, it's there. The other one, maybe I'm there, maybe I'm not. When it works for me, I'm going to be putting on a little extra workload on a very hot day in July when electric demand is very high. So I just don't put anything out on default on my net metering because I'm consuming all my electricity. Another time, I'm going to do the same thing in January, but I don't have any electricity to put out because of net metering. So now I'm going to consume a lot of electricity. So it's not reliable, it's simply not the same product, and it guaranteed to raise electric rates if this bill passes. So please push the red button. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in favor of SB 79. As you've often heard, and as you just heard from my colleague from Stratford, opposition to net metering and expanding net metering has always been based on this dogged insistence that paying the retail energy-only rate for those net metered kilowatt hours is a big subsidy, that it's an overpayment that must then be recovered from other ratepayers, so that it's this giant cost shift from the many, like seniors and single moms and small businesses, to the relatively few who are net metering. So several years ago, this legislature directed, and our own Department of Energy conducted, or at least they contracted for, and they oversaw a study, which you heard my colleague from Hampton on the earlier bill describe. They did a big study of net metering and a big analysis of real-time energy supply and demand and cost modeling that my colleague from Stratford was referring to, how the system works, and to settle the question about the value of net metering. And that study took several years to complete. We all waited several years, and it was completed last November. It was called the Value of Distributed Energy Resources Studies. It must have been really thorough. It took several years. And the bottom line that you heard my colleague from Hampton talk about there's no big giant cost shift. At most, under the most conservative assumptions about the way the grid operates and real-time energy prices and all that, at most, a 1% cost shift. 1%, that's 1 penny on $1. So in fact, the Value of Distributed Energy Resources study found that net metered energy is worth the retail price because it goes directly onto the grid, supplying the next closest neighbor, avoiding all long-distance transmission costs and virtually all local distribution costs. The New England Independent System Operator testified to the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee in January that in the aggregate, all the net metered solar installations in the region substantially reduce regional demand and thus lower the market clearing energy price for all customers and also reducing long-distance transmission costs. Our distribution utilities across the state, Eversource, Unitil, Liberty, the Co-op, they all recognize that net metered energy systems reduce their default supply requirements, again, lowering costs for all. Now, in conclusion, I want to share with you a real-world example of the harm that our arbitrary limitation on the scale of net metered solar arrays is doing to our New Hampshire businesses. This bill in particular would raise the arbitrary cap from 1 megawatts to 5 megawatts. And of course, industries and businesses are institutions that use large amounts of energy, and they provide large numbers of jobs and produce large amounts of tax revenue for our state. Not far from here, just across the river down in Pembroke, the Associated Grocers of New England operates an enormous refrigerated warehouse. A couple years ago, they put up a 1 megawatt solar array on their roof because that's the largest that they're allowed to build and to interconnect to the grid. Can't interconnect anything more than 1 megawatt per our state law. That array produces only about 20% of all the energy that that enormous refrigerated warehouse uses. And they actually have a whole lot more roof space that sits there empty and unused, even though filling it with solar would help them reduce their costs immensely. So the result of that is that their energy costs are much higher than they should be, and that means that the prices that their members, all those small town grocers across our state, have to charge for their food are higher than they need to be. And those are the prices that our constituents pay. So at this time, when we've all been harshly reminded about how vulnerable New Hampshire businesses and residents are to the whims of the global energy market, we in this body should be doing everything we can to remove barriers to private investment, give our businesses another tool in their toolbox to help reduce their own costs while diversifying our state's energy supply and creating local jobs and supporting local economies in the process, and yes, reducing costs for all. So please vote yes on ought to pass on SB 79. Thank you.
Representative Sandra Natasta was requested a roll call. Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members, take your seats. The motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 79. This is going to be a roll call vote. Chair recognizes Representative Voice for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that the study referenced several times here in the last few minutes did indeed find that cost shifts of 1 to 2.9% happened today, and that other studies show that these percentages go up with net metering expansion. And if I also know that any business in our state can build and benefit from up to 5 megawatts of solar power today, state law does not prevent anyone from connecting more than 1 megawatt of power. It simply prevents you from collecting net metering subsidies over 1 megawatt. And if I also know that fixed income seniors and single moms and hardworking Granite Staters should not be obligated to help a private, for-profit business earn a better return on its investments. And finally, if I know that our state's governor said of net metering expansion just last year, and I quote, "I've vetoed these crazy ideas before, and if they come back in the future, I'll veto them again," unquote, Would I now press the red button to spare the governor that bother? Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Parcell for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that raising net metering to 5 megawatts will result in load reduction across the grid, lower capacity payments, and avoided transmission costs, all to the benefit of ratepayers, and further, if I know that current technology makes the installation of 1 megawatt system often economically unviable, an increase to 5 megawatts will allow the installer the economies of scale necessary to go forward. And last, knowing that the Business Industrial Association of New Hampshire supports this legislation because, like myself, the BIA knows that this bill is a jobs creation bill. It will allow New Hampshire business to allot their resources to retain workforce rather than ship our valuable energy dollars out of state. Would I now press the green button, knowing that I've done my part to reduce energy costs and support our New Hampshire economy? Thank you.
Motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 79. This is a roll call vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. If all members present had an opportunity to vote, House will attend the state of the vote. 194 voting yea, 179 voting nay. Motion is adopted. The House will be in order. Majority Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy, to which was referred Senate Bill 167 FN Local, an act relative to green hydrogen energy and infrastructure. Having considered the same, report the same with the following resolution. Resolved that it's inexpedient to legislate. Representative Doug Thomas from the majority of the committee. Minority of the committee, having considered the same and being unable to agree with the majority, report with the recommendation that the bill ought to pass. Senator Tony Kaplan from the minority of the committee. Chair recognizes Representative Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I rise to speak against the inexpedient to legislate motion on Senate Bill 167, a bill to incentivize a green hydrogen industry in New Hampshire. You may have heard of FOMO, fear of missing out. I've heard of it because I am the father of 3 children in their teens and early 20s who talk about it as one of the stressors in their young lives. I tell them I have FOLO, fear of losing out, because I see New Hampshire late to the starting gate on the energy transition we are in the process of undertaking as a region and a nation. This bill is a bipartisan attempt to catch us up with our neighbors in terms of the production of clean hydrogen, seen as one of the pillars of the transition in energy that I just mentioned. Let me briefly explain what clean hydrogen is and why it's going to be an important energy source and why we need this bill. Hydrogen is widely available. It's a plentiful element on our planet. It's the H in H2O water and the H in CH4 or methane. Hydrogen is useful because it contains a lot of very available energy. It's much more energy dense than gasoline, for example. But it takes a lot of energy to produce or split it apart from either water or methane, the two main sources for current hydrogen production.
The member will suspend. The member has a right to be heard. If you have to have a conversation, take it out into the anteroom, please. Member may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most hydrogen produced today is used in oil refineries as part of the refinery process or in the production of fertilizers, produced mainly from natural gas or methane in a process known as steam reformulation, which involves heating the natural gas. It's a very carbon-polluting process, producing about 10 tons of carbon emissions for every ton of hydrogen. So not helpful if you're concerned about saving the climate from carbon pollution. The other way of producing hydrogen, splitting water molecules with electricity, gets us closer to clean or green hydrogen depending on the source of the electricity. If you use renewable electricity from wind or solar or nuclear electricity, you get clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, splitting the H off the O in the water with no carbon emissions. And when you burn that hydrogen you've produced as a fuel, you also get no carbon emissions. You just get water. So it's an ideal fuel when produced from green renewables or zero carbon nuclear energy. It's light, you can store it relatively easily, and transport it as a gas or in compressed form as a liquid. So clean or green hydrogen is a small but fast-growing area of the transition from fossil-based carbon fuels to clean energy sources that we have committed to in order to avoid the worst-case scenarios of climate change. And green hydrogen is forecast to play a central role in decarbonizing heavy industries, such as steel and chemicals, and for large trucks and airplanes where batteries are just too heavy to make an electric vehicle practical. It's also ideal for storing wind and solar power used to produce it, transforming an intermittent, unreliable source of energy into a dispatchable, turn on or off with a switch, grid-ready source of electricity when used in a hydrogen-powered generating station, thus helping to solve the problem of intermittency in an electricity grid with a large percentage of renewables, which is what we're aiming for. The International Energy Agency says total hydrogen production will need to be around 180 million metric tons by 2030, from just over 90 million tons today, to reach our climate goals. Green production of the gas is less than 1% of the current total production and would need to rise to more than 90 million tons by 2030. In other words, in just 7 years, we need to double our production of hydrogen, and half of that would have to be clean or green hydrogen. It's a huge job, but it's well underway. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 includes $8 billion in grants for clean hydrogen projects. The Inflation Reduction Act includes more tax credits, production and investment credits for clean hydrogen production. So there's lots of money out there to jumpstart this essential industry. In effect, this is a wartime mobilization, or something akin to a wartime mobilization of resources to accomplish an existential task for our country. 7 states, including our neighbors, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, have formed the New England Clean Hydrogen Hub that includes, besides those 7 states, 100 partner institutions, including power companies, utilities, manufacturers, universities, etc., all focused on aligning the integration of renewables, such as onshore and offshore wind, hydropower, and solar and nuclear power into clean hydrogen production, and the evaluation of clean hydrogen for use in transportation, including medium and heavy-duty trucks, heavy industry, and power generation applications. New Hampshire is not one of those states currently mobilizing to be a part of this, what promises to be the engine of the 21st century regional economy. This bill, SB 167, is an attempt to catch the green hydrogen train before it leaves the station. With this bill, New Hampshire would make a bid for some of these projects by establishing a $500,000 credit against the business profits tax for a single project, for a maximum of 10 green hydrogen projects a year. That's a good sweetener for the establishment of infrastructure and jobs worth billions over the lifetime of these projects. The bill would establish an advisory committee tasked with identifying barriers and streamlining the permitting process. The committee would also identify opportunities to integrate green hydrogen in transportation, energy, industrial, and other sectors, and would also be tasked with partnering with any hydrogen hubs in the region, thus joining with our fellow states in New England to build a better future for ourselves instead of waiting for somebody else to do the heavy lifting. In short, guiding and incentivizing a green hydrogen industry in our state and region to meet not only our energy diversity needs, but economic development long-term goals to ensure our way of life for years to come. So if you're like me and you're a secret FOLO sufferer, or even worse, if you're upset at New Hampshire's neutral stance in the face of a nationwide mobilization to transform our energy system to ensure a livable planet, you want to make sure we overturn this ITL to show that New Hampshire is ready to be a part of the clean energy transition. Vote red so that a better motion can be made. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my colleague has given a very good speech regarding hydrogen, a very technical speech, but this bill is not really about hydrogen. It's about establishing another committee out of our 400 plus committees we already have that will most undoubtedly have government interference before the free market even gets a foot on the ground. That's our primary opposition to this bill. This bill presumes that an advisory committee is needed to establish tax credits and other government regulations before the market even comes into New Hampshire. As far as we know, there's only one manufacturer made a recent public announcement about producing hydrogen, and they flatly said they don't need this bill. That's a sign that the free market works. This bill, having an advisory committee, would talk about things about establishing tax credits, regulations, and for a market that, as was mentioned previously, New Hampshire didn't even bid on a hub for hydrogen markets because we have none here yet. We believe that the free market should dictate when and where such action is necessary, and right now we don't see a lot of hydrogen coming into this state. By the way, the term green hydrogen was used, and that's the term that would be used for this advisory committee to be studying. But just as an aside, and I won't go into it, but there are other forms of manufacturing hydrogen, but they all mean the same thing. Hydrogen is hydrogen. You might hear the term blue hydrogen. That's manufactured using natural gas. There's a term called yellow hydrogen, used by manufacturing solar only. Believe it or not, there's pink hydrogen, used to manufactured by nuclear power only, and then the dreaded gray hydrogen, which is manufactured by oil and coal. So this advisory committee would be studying just the use of green hydrogen. I would say that in view of the fact that we don't have a large market coming in here yet, the tax credits that they would be studying would be placed upon the Department of Energy, and they have said that they're not a tax agency, so I'm not sure if that's going to be well placed if they study that. I would say there's one more thing too. We like hydrogen. We think it's going to be good, but there are some concerns yet still that haven't been completely studied yet. And I will say that one member of our majority that voted ITL, there's a concern that that there's a potential impact of hydrogen leaks getting into our atmosphere. All I'll say on that is that a recent article from Reuters cites 4 reports that suggest more data is needed to learn the full effects of leaking hydrogen and what can be tolerated before it negates its energy advantage. So I don't think we're ready yet. This bill is not ready for prime time. We don't need government interference. Let the free market work when it comes. For those reasons, we ask you vote inexpedient to legislate. Please press the green button. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion before us Majority Committee report of inexpedient delay on Senate Bill 167. Are you ready for the question? A division has been requested. Members, take your seats. The motion before us is the Majority Committee report of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 167. This is a division vote. Chair recognizes Representative McWilliams for a parliamentary inquiry. House will be in order. Members need to be in your seats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that hydrogen is currently happening in New Hampshire, in Groveton, we have an inaugural pilot project, and that more is coming. And further, Mr. Speaker, if I know that hydrogen is incredibly incentivized right now by the federal government, and there is plenty of opportunity in New Hampshire for things like nuclear to be converted to hydrogen. Advisory board within the Department of Energy that has the support of the Department of Energy to look at hydrogen. Would I then press the red button in order to overturn the ITL motion so a better motion may be made? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Volz for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that energy from hydrogen has commercial potential, but currently there are no businesses in New Hampshire currently making or using it commercially, and if I also know that this bill sets up a committee to study investigating creating tax breaks when none may ever be needed. Finally, if I know that any fast-moving technology where it's concerned, government help or regulation always turns out to be too little too late. But I now press the green button to get government out of the way of a possible hydrogen energy future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion before us is the Majority Committee report of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 167. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. If all members present had an opportunity to vote, House will attend to state of the vote. (187) voting yea, 186 voting nay. Committee report is adopted. Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 51 FN. An act creating a commission to study charitable gaming and historic horse races and relative to the moratorium on licensed historical horse racing facilities. Consider the same, report the same with the recommendation the bill ought to pass. So John Janigian for the committee. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Committee report is adopted. Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 104 FNA, an act to regulate online gambling and direct net proceeds to a community college education scholarship fund. Considered the same, report the same with the following resolution. Resolved that it's inexpedient to legislate. Senator Fred Doucette for the committee. Chair recognizes Representative Almy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to move indefinite postponement of SB 104.
The motion is in order. The motion before us is indefinitely postponed Senate Bill 104. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 104 is indefinitely postponed. Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was, House will be in order, to which was referred Senate Bill 195 FN, an act relative to the purchase of steel products that Buy American certification. Having considered the same, report the same, the recommendation that the bill ought to pass. A.C. Grota from the committee. Chair recognizes Representative Grota. For a motion.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a motion to special order SB 95 to its regular place on the next House calendar. Next calendar.
And you may speak to your motion.
Thank you. So SB 195 has a grammatical error that cannot be fixed without a floor amendment, which has been drafted and is in the clerk's office. So we would like to present that to you, to the House, next week, at the next House session, and we would like to have it on the regular calendar.
The motion is to special order Senate Bill 195. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 195 is special ordered to the next House session. Committee on Fish and Game and Marine Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 15 FN, an act relative to the use of tree stands and observation blinds. Considered the same, report the same with the following amendment. The recommendation of the bill ought to pass with amendment. Senator Ellen Reed for the committee. The committee amendment is 1381H, printed in House Record 22, page 25. You ready for the question on the amendment? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. Representative Splain offers floor amendment 1588H. It's in your seat pockets. And the chair recognizes Representative Splain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Esteemed body, we passed this bill some months ago, and the body on the other side of the wall is not enthusiastic about it. And in order to drive home the fact that we believe that we should repeal the ban on brass knuckles, blackjacks, and slungshots, I have asked us to please attach it to the back end of this bill from the Senate that we're sending back over to them. I hope this is, or from the other body, excuse my vulgar language. I would really appreciate your support, and I hope you will join me in pushing green on this amendment, and I request a division vote.
The question before Chair recognizes Representative Muse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I rise today to ask for your support in defeating this harmful and unnecessary amendment. What blackjacks and brass knuckles have to do with a bill on tree stands and hunting blinds is something that I'll leave for the other representative to fill you in on later. But the bottom line is that this amendment would end our state's current prohibition on carrying or possessing with intent to sell blackjacks, brass knuckles, and slingshots. Greater availability of these weapons would be one more thing that jeopardizes the safety of our schools, our streets, our bars, our public gathering places, and our law enforcement officers. When this measure came through as a separate bill in the House, it's worth noting that neither the state police nor the Chiefs of Police Association weighed in on it. But when that bill came before the other body, it's important to note that both opposed it. So please join our law enforcement community in opposing this unnecessary and harmful change to a good bill that was on consent for a very good reason. Thank you very much.
The motion before us is displaying floor amendment 1588H. A division has been requested. Members will be in their seats. Division. The motion before us is displaying floor amendment 1588H. This is a division vote. Chair recognizes Representative Harries for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that HB 31 already passed in the House, established the House position of repealing this law, and if I know that the current law still allows the holder of a hunting or fishing license to possess or sell these antique self-defense items, and if I know the current law, when seconds count, police are only minutes away, would I now press the green button to pass this amendment so we the people can choose how to defend ourselves and send the language of HB 31 back over the wall? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Muse for parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that privacy and respect for property rights are the New Hampshire way, and that blackjacks and brass knuckles are not, and if I know that the state police and the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association are both opposed to the bill that the language for this amendment was taken from when it came before a committee in the other body, and if I'm also opposed to creating Christmas tree bills unnecessarily on principle, then would I press the red button to oppose the motion to pass this unrelated and dangerous amendment? Thank you.
Motion before us is the displaying floor amendment 1588H to Senate Bill 15. This is a division vote. If you're in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, press the red button. Voting stations are open for 30 seconds. Have all members present had an opportunity to vote? House will attend the state of the vote. 177 voting yea, 196 voting nay. The amendment fails. We're back to the motion of order pass as amended. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the committee report of order pass amendments is adopted. And this bill is returned to the Criminal Justice Committee. The chair recognizes a member from Auburn, Representative Osborne, for a third reading motion.
Hey, resolved that the House now adjourn from the early session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time, that the reading of bills be by title only and resolutions by caption only, and that all bills ordered at third reading be read a third time by this resolution, and that all titles of bills be the same as adopted, and that they be passed at the present time. And when the House adjourns today, it be to meet at the call of the chair.
Question is on the third reading motion. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. We still have announcements and unanimous consent, so please, everybody stay in their seats. Chair recognizes Representative Marjorie Smith for an announcement. The House will be in order.
Good afternoon, and as soon as this session is finished, if you would make your way outside to the lawn, you will see that UNH has its usual spectacular barbecue waiting for you, and also some wonderful research projects that you could look at and take great pride in what our state university does. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Dutsey.
Would the Hillsborough County Executive Board meet in the ante-room just for a few minutes? I just want to give you an announcement. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Osborne.
A reminder that Republicans will caucus in the hall directly right now after everyone leaves. We will not take too long, so there hopefully will still be some barbecue left for you outside when we're done.
Chair recognizes the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of quick announcements. One, in the House calendar, at the beginning of the House calendar, on page 2, you will see there is a list of 2023 House bills amended by the Senate. At the beginning of today, we took up 5 of those bills. This is where you will find the list, as well as online, of the House bills amended by the Senate. So please be mindful of that. We take those up at the beginning of House session. Next, food and beverage in the chamber. This is your weekly reminder. No food or beverage in the chamber. Lastly, when we have a guest singer, when the speaker announces that the person is performing for us, please do not sing along. Only sing along if the speaker announces that somebody is leading us in singing. Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes Representative Gorski for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing I've learned as a speaker, it's very difficult to go right in front of lunch. But if you can, thank you, colleagues, for indulging me just for a few minutes here. I want to take this opportunity to officially welcome my cousin Ava, her husband John Janusz, and one of her sons, Sebastian, to New Hampshire. Their other son, Damien, and his wife, Kasha, could not make this trip. This is their first trip here to the U.S. and their first trip to New Hampshire. Ava and I met 5 years ago. Ava and her family live in Poland, approximately 45 minutes from the Ukraine border. But let me tell you a little bit about this extraordinary family. Since February 2022, at the first influx of the Ukrainian citizens at the Polish border, Ava, Janusz, and Sebastian have been involved with assisting their Ukraine neighbors. They have welcomed multiple sets of people into their home during their transition from living in Ukraine to traveling to relatives in other countries, in helping them find permanent housing in Poland, Germany, and other countries. They made two to three trips per week into the Ukraine at the beginning of the war. And the seniors transported approximately 3 tons of food, blankets, diapers, and other household items on their way into the country. These items were needed by those displaced from eastern Ukraine into western Ukraine, and those who did not leave their country. On their way back to Poland on each trip, they stopped on the Polish side of the border to transport refugees to temporary shelters and often to their own personal home. Some of their humanitarian efforts included visits to supply orphanages, hospitals, and Ukraine centers for eternally displaced citizens. The orphanages quickly found their limits exceeded as many young families brought their children to the orphanage for safety so that both their parents could assist in the war efforts. Where they were not packing trucks and commercial vans to make trips into the Ukraine, they were organizing the collection of the most necessary items from the various communities from other European countries. Ava, through her work, had contacts in Austria and was able to have items collected there and shipped to Poland for distribution to the refugee centers. There were other days that they simply traveled to the border crossings to transport refugees to the centers. There were several trips that touched their hearts, in which they welcomed people into their homes. On one such trip, Sebastian packed up several older women and a young girl. He learned that the teenager was handicapped with mental and some physical disabilities. This is a small group that could not be dropped off at the refugee center, so they placed them the small group that could not drop at the refugee center instead invited them into their own home. The senior's other son, Damien, and his wife, Kasia, welcomed Ukraine families into their home. Kasia also regularly cooked food and made refreshments for the refugee center and for people placed in their village. The majority of the work that the seniors did in Ukraine was a cooperation with the mayor of their town, who contributed with mayors of the Ukraine towns visited by them. This ensured, again, that goods would be received by most in need. In closing, I am in awe of their efforts over an extended period. One final footnote, the family, with the support of the mayor, has filed to create a nonprofit organization which will provide them certification as a charitable organization. Their nonprofit is close to being finalized, called the Narrow Promoci Rachty. Fellow colleagues, I'm very proud of my cousins and their family in their efforts. And the New Hampshire House has made a declaration expressing our appreciation for their humanitarian efforts. In closing, it's declared, by virtue of my signature inscribed below, the House of Representatives does publicly thank Ava, Janusz, Sebastian, Damien, and Kasia for their selfless efforts and for reminding us of what humans do best, in that it is to help one another without question, without fail, dated 4th day of May, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Joining us in the gallery today, we have the pleasure of having the Swinar family, who have traveled from Poland. On behalf of the House of Representatives, welcome to Representatives Hall, and thank you for everything you've done to serve those in Ukraine. At this time, I'd like to present you with a House declaration and commend you on your humanitarian efforts. For what reason does the member rise?
Mr. Speaker, I would move that the remarks of the previous representative speaking and your own remarks be placed in our permanent journal.
Without objection. Chair recognizes Representative Edgar for unanimous consent.
Okay, I guess some of the members SU 21 were going to come up if they want. If you want to. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Mr. Speaker, for letting me speak. Okay, this past Monday, a ceremony was held at the Winnicott High School auditorium in Hampton. The plaque installed above the auditorium entrance reads, Robert R. Cushing, Jr., Auditorium. This auditorium is named in honor of Robert Rennie Cushing, Jr., 70, for his dedicated service to his hometown of Hampton and the people of New Hampshire as school district moderator and a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives. It was in this auditorium that Rennie served as a moderator of SU 21, which serves the towns of Northampton, Hampton, Hampton Falls, Seabrook, and Southampton. He served as moderator from 1994 until he passed last year. Rennie also served many terms in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, representing Hampton. At the ceremony, the chairman of SU 21 School Board spoke of Rennie's fierce pursuit of equality and justice. The present principal noted that it was probably better for him that he was not principal when Rennie attended high school. In addition to being an excellent football player, Rennie managed to organize walkouts, refused to shave his sideburns, and maybe a few other things. Some thought a plaque outside above a chair just outside the principal's office might have been another place for a plaque. Okay. It was really good and fitting that Rennie was recognized for his many accomplishments by naming the auditorium that he served in after him. Thank you.
What reason did member rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move the remarks be placed in the permanent journal.
Without objection. Representative Osborne moves that the House stand in recess for the purpose of introduction of bills and roll bill amendments and roll bill reports and receiving messages. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The House is in recess to the call of the chair.